drives mortgage rates anyway? This is a big one. It's inflation. It's not the Fed. The Fed influences mortgage rates, but not in the way that you think. See, the Fed controls very short-term lending, overnight lending. A mortgage, as you know, can be a very long period of time, like 30 years. So because of that, mortgages are highly influenced by inflation. So if we want to understand, first off, why, it's because if you would think about it from the perspective of actually lending money, right? Not the one who's borrowing it or taking out a loan, not from an originator or realtor or borrower's perspective, but look at it if you were the one lending money. So let's say you gave me a mortgage and I'm making payments to you every month of $2,000 a month. You take that $2,000, you go out and you buy a basket of goods and services with that $2,000. But what occurs is that over time, you realize that check that you receive for 2,000 bucks, it's not getting everything in that basket that you used to be able to get. You have to leave a few things off because inflation is making the cost rise of those items. So it still says $2,000 on the check, but it buys less and less and less over time. The buying power is eroding. And why? Because of inflation. You see, when inflation starts to rise more dramatically, what you have to do is you have to charge a higher interest rate because that will offset your more rapid rate of erosion of your buying power. When interest rates go down, it's because inflation is low. When inflation goes down, mortgage rates go down. When inflation goes up, mortgage rates go up. And it's because as a lender, you have to offset the erosion that occurs from higher inflation. So what is inflation anyway? Well, the definition of inflation essentially is it's too many dollars chasing too few goods. So when you think about what's happened in the real estate market, we had too many buyers chasing too little inventory. So it's too many dollars, buyers, too little goods, inventory, and it caused the price to go up or inflate. Now, inflation, as we know, is something that does create a lot of pain and problems for people around the country. As we watch the cost of goods go up and the cost of services go up very rapidly now, it means that our standard of living decreases. So people become unhappy. And here comes the Federal Reserve. So what the Federal Reserve wants to do is stabilize prices. It's one of their mandates. So they want to try and keep prices from going up so quickly. They'd like to see inflation more at 2%, and right now it's at 8.5%. So how do they do this? What they do is they come in and they start raising short-term rates. Now, while that doesn't affect mortgage rates, here's what it does affect. Home equity lines of credit, credit cards, car loans, personal loans. So if you make it more expensive to borrow, people borrow less. But it also impacts businesses. And this is where the big money is. Commercial loans, industrial loans. Hey, am I going to build that factory? Am I going to expand my business? When we start thinking about that, if the cost to borrow becomes more and more and more expensive, well, then what do? You think maybe twice about making that big investment of $300 or $400 million. So when the Fed hikes rates, there's less money created. So the Fed hikes and some money comes out of the equation. So now there's less money. That's one of the ways they fight inflation. But also, when they start hiking rates, it means that banks can now pay more for you to save money. Now, you might recall it wasn't too long ago that the rate you would get by putting your money in a bank was almost nothing. Now it's a little better, but as the Fed will continue to hike, it'll get to be more and more attractive. And psychologically, human beings are programmed that if you get less than a 2% rate of interest, people don't have any incentive to save. In fact, they'll look for more risky investments or they'll just spend it. If they get more than 2%, they'll start thinking about saving. So as the Fed hikes rates, people start to save and put money in the bank. So now there's less money out there. That's the way that the Fed fights inflation. But there is some other good news, and that the amount of goods that have been out there, there's been shutdowns and shipping and supply chain. I'm sure you've heard of all this. It is starting to slowly get better and better and better. As that happens and more goods come on the market and the supply chain improves, you will start to see some stabilization in pricing. So we think inflation will come down slowly but surely over time. And this is what the Fed does by hiking rates. Now, on September 21st, that's the next Fed meeting. They'll hike rates there. They'll probably hike rates again their next meeting, November 2nd. And that will cause the amount of borrowing to slow down and inflation to come down. So why is this so important? It's because inflation drives mortgage rates. And you can see for the past, this chart will show you a little more than 50 years, when the Fed hikes rates in white, I'm sorry, when inflation, excuse me, goes up in white, mortgage rates in blue follow suit. When inflation comes down in white, mortgage rates in blue follow suit. And the pattern repeats itself. And you can see where we are right here. The rate of inflation zooming higher, a little bit of a delay, but mortgage rates have followed suit and have started to move up. So if we want to know when are mortgage rates going to come down, well, it's when inflation comes down. So how is inflation measured? So inflation's measured every month. And there's a report that comes out every month that tells you how much the inflation rate was for that particular month. When you look at the last 12 months together, so the latest data we got was for the month of July. We received this the second week of August. And when you take from here and you go the last 12 months, which is through August of 2021, you add that all up together, there's a little bit of rounding, a little bit of compounding, and you get an 8.5% year over year rate of inflation, which is way too high, way above what the Fed wants it to be, way above what you and I are comfortable with, because we haven't seen inflation like this in 40 years. So, it makes it uncomfortable. It means that our earnings aren't buying as much as they used to. Our standard of living is getting worse. So the Fed's trying to fight this. Well, the way that inflation is measured, again, is the most recent 12 months. Now, when we got this last number for July of 2022, the inflation reading for the month was 0. That's pretty good, but that was predominantly due to the fact that gasoline prices have been coming down. And gasoline prices, will take it. We're happy they're coming down, but unfortunately, it's because the Strategic Petroleum Reserve has been tapped into at 1 million barrels a day. That stops at the end of next month. So we have to keep a watch on that, and gasoline prices may start going up again, and that might cause a little bit of inflation. But when we get the next data for the month of August, we'll get that the second week of September, that's going to replace this reading for August. And notice how the reading for August was pretty low, comparatively speaking, at around 0.3%. And September was also a pretty low number. So if the readings come out a little bit higher for September of 22 and August of 22, well, then you will more than likely see inflation year over year rise. And if inflation year over year rises, mortgage rates will rise in accordance with that. But here's the good news. Starting October, you can notice that the readings from 2021 and early 22 were quite high. So that means there is a really high probability, as the new readings for inflation come in, along with the fact that people will borrow less, you'll have more goods flow, you'll have more savings, we should start to see inflation come down on its own. But then when you compare them to the readings from the previous year, it is very likely that you'll start to see inflation get under 8%, under 7%, under 6% as we get through the end of this year into early next year. And that means really good news for mortgage rates. We should start to see mortgage rates come down. Probably by the end of this year, early next year, see mortgage rates below 5% with a 4 on them. So if mortgage rates start with a 4, many of us who've been in the business for a long time, there were periods of time we could only dream of mortgage rates with 4 as the start rate, right? So I think that the real estate market will respond quite favorably. We did have a bit of a shock seeing mortgage rates go up so much from 3% to 6% in a really short period of time. So having them get back in the 4s, I think, will spur a lot of activity in real estate. And believe it or not, probably a lot of refinance activity too, since half of all the existing mortgages out there are above 4%, half are below 4%. Now, what about a recession? So if we're not in a recession already, and they seem to try and change what the definition of recession is, because it was always accepted that 2 consecutive quarters where the GDP reading was a minus number, in other words, the economy is contracting 2 quarters in a row, it was called a recession. And we've always had a recession when that happens. But now, for whatever reason, they're kind of changing the definition. But we did have the first quarter 2022 was negative, and the second quarter. So maybe we are in a recession, but even if we're not, we sure appear to be headed for one. And one of the reasons is because when the Fed goes into a rate hike cycle, just about every time they do it, you get these darker areas a recession. So let's look over the last 70 years. Hiking cycle, recession, again, 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 again. And the last recession, Fed started with the hiking cycle, and here we are. The Fed's going to hike us, if they haven't done so already, into a recession. Now, some people say, well, we can't have a recession because the job market's so strong. In fact, Chris Waller, the person you see pictured here, he's a Fed governor. Now, Fed governors, they vote on monetary policy every year. There's 12 people who vote on the most important price in the world, and that's the cost of money. They're the Fed members who vote every year. And Chris Waller is a governor, so governors vote every year. He says he can't see a recession. Now, at the time, the unemployment rate was 3.6%. Today, it's 3.5, with a 3.6% unemployment rate. Well, Mr. Waller, you probably should look at a little history, because that's precisely when you get recessions. You don't get recessions that start when the unemployment rate is high. Recessions begin when the unemployment rate hits its lowest level and then starts to turn higher. And this looks over the last 100 years, and you will see with absolute 100% accuracy, every time the unemployment rate hits its lowest level and starts to tick higher, you get a recession. So why does that happen? Well, it's common sense. If things are good and business is good, you're hiring people. So you hire, 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 and as you do, to accommodate the good business times, the unemployment rate continues to drop. But eventually, when business slows down, you stop hiring and you actually have to start letting people go. And when you start letting people go, the unemployment rate starts to tick up. But here's where it gets interesting, because now those newly unemployed people, what they do is they now change their spending habits. So they spend less, they buy less, they go out to dinners less. And what that does is that then causes the businesses that they used to frequent to slow down. And those businesses now, pardon me, those businesses now have to let people go. And that's why you get the unemployment rate to zoom higher in a short period of time and you get into a recession. So what does this mean? If you believe that I do, like I do, that we are either in or headed for a recession, what does that mean to us? What does that mean for mortgage rates? And what does it mean for real estate? Well, let's look at history. As you can see, the last time we had a recession, well, mortgage rates declined by 1% and then even more after the recession. Same thing the one prior to that. Same story on the one prior to that, and again, and again, and again. So mortgage rates go down during recessions. So that's good news if you're wanting mortgage rates to decline. We certainly feel for a recession because the unemployment rate will probably tick up a few percentage points from right now, let's say 3.5 to probably 6% or so. But mortgage rates will respond favorably. Now, what about real estate? Because we know that real estate is an important part of this. And by the way, when you take a look at mortgage rates along with the Fed funds rate, here's the Fed funds rate here, and you can see that the Fed funds rate, as the Fed funds rate rises, a lot of times mortgage rates decline because what the Fed's doing is fighting inflation. But let's take a look at real estate. Real estate, as you can see here, during the last 9 recessions, this is according to Case-Shiller's Home Price Index, which is the best resource for home price appreciation, shows that home values actually appreciated during and after 8 out of 9 recessions. What was the story with the recession here, where we had the housing bubble? Well, it wasn't the recession that caused prices to go down in housing. It was the housing bubble that actually led us into the recession. So what happened here? You had demographically simply too many homes being built and not enough demand for homes. Households were not being formed at a very big level. And that's because it started in 2006. 2006, the median age of a first-time home buyer was 33 years old. That means they were born in 1973. Well, if you look at birth rates from 1973, they plummeted. There's a reason for that, because that was the year, in January of 1973, that abortions were legalized, so birth rates dropped a lot, and they stayed low for quite a few years. 33 years later, that meant a lot fewer people coming of age to buy homes. But meanwhile, builders were building more homes than we had ever built before during that period. And the imbalance of too many homes, not enough people to buy them, caused prices to decline. But in addition to that, mortgage programs got crazy. No income, no asset, no job, non-owner occupied, nothing down, and not very good credit either. Heck, what could go wrong with those loans, right? Yeah, well, it created a perfect storm and a housing bubble. We have nothing like that today. So we know that real estate values should stay good. But the problem is whenever you have these situations, you get people that come out of the woodwork and want to use these for personal gain. Now, people like a friend of mine, Patrick Bet David, who is a really bright guy, he came out with a whole thing about housing crash. And of course, that helped sell a lot of tickets to his event. This gentleman, Grant Cardone, always looking to try and sell stuff, said just a couple of weeks ago that don't buy a home unless you can afford to waste money. And then he goes through a whole series of an example. And he says, well, if you purchased a home with $5,000 down for $100,000, and then 10 years later, you sell it for 200,000, it seems like you made a big profit because you turned 5,000 into 100. But then he says, okay, but how about the interest expense, the property taxes, the real estate piece? And he says, you're only going to make $14,000. And then he divides it by the 10 years and says it's 1.4% a year. Now, the problem with this is that he not only doesn't have the math right, but let's just go with that. He never considers that unless you're going to live in a tent somewhere, that you have to have a cost to live someplace, right? So if we were to just say, okay, even just $1,500 starting rent with a 6% annual rental increase, that would be $237,000. Add that to the 14,000, and now it's really a 5,000% rate of return, or 500% per year. This is a problem that we always see in these markets where people come out of the woodwork saying these negative things. And if we were to go back a little bit, I said Grant Cardone crawled out from under a rock about real estate because 6 years ago, he was out there screaming and yelling and wanting to sell tickets to his event, saying that buying a house is for suckers. He said, should you own a home? Unless you have 20 million bucks in the bank in cash, you have no business buying a house. Well, that might have been good for Grant Cardone to sell tickets, but I feel bad for anybody who listened to him, because if they bought a home in 2016, or if they missed out on it for $300,000 with 10% down, today, according to the Case-Shiller Home Price Index, they would have lost 72% gain, or $216,000, or 720% profit. And of course, then our friend Gary Vaynerchuk, who, Gary V is a great marketer, but he has been very public that he hates housing. So he goes on these rants, and the last one that he went on was 2019, where he was cursing and yelling and screaming, do not buy a house. It's not the American dream. It's full of whatever. He says it's, ties up capital. It's not smart. He says he's pissed he owns a home, but he does own a home. He says that it's buying a Lambo is better off because you could show off your Lambo. He says all these negative things about housing, but since he made that big rant, and you could pull it up anywhere on the internet, if you would have purchased a $400,000 home instead of listening to him at 10% down, a 40,000 investment, you would have been up 48% since then, or had $592,000, $192,000 profit, or 480% profit on your money. See, this is why we have to be careful with these things. It's very important because the media will be all over this as soon as we start to see recession come in. Like when it's an official recession, they're going to say, don't buy a home, don't buy a home. But they don't understand real estate does do well during recessions. Rates come down, and then it creates net worth. Now, according to Kiplinger's, this just came out. This is recent. This is from earlier this month. If you have $10.8 million in net worth, that's all your assets minus your liabilities, you're in the top 1% in the United States in net worth. The top 2% is 2.5 million. Top 5% is $1 million. Top 10% is 800,000. And if your net worth is $500,000, you're in the top 50% of Americans. The thing of it is, though, is that on average, 2/3 of everyone's net worth comes from owning a home. So if you want to improve your net worth, you do it with real estate. Now, Diana Olick has been the arch enemy of individuals looking to buy a home, real estate agents, mortgage professionals for about 10 years now. And she has put out literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of negative stories about real estate. And I'm just going to pull a few things just so you could see what she has been talking about, just a few of them. Back in 2015, 7 years ago, she said that there was a bubble larger than 2006. But since then, if you would have purchased a $300,000 home, obviously home values have gone up a lot. And you would have lost in that 1 year 5.1% or $15,000. In 2016, she says, we're in a new housing bubble. Not apologizing that you missed out, just rinse and repeat, new housing bubble. In 2017, homeownership doesn't build wealth. Well, I'd love for someone to just tell me the one person who hasn't built any wealth in the past 5 years in real estate. Just one, not like, 10%, 20%, no, just one person who hasn't built wealth in real estate. And then she keeps saying that half the US housing market is overvalued, but she's been saying that since 2017. And then in 2018, she said it's better to rent than to buy a home. Well, show me the one person who's been better off renting than buying a home since 2018. And of course, values that year went up again. And in 2019, she comes out with this proclamation in the middle of the year. The housing market's about to shift in a bad way. But the second half of 2019, home values went up another 15,000 or 4%. And then at the end of 2019, her forecast for 2020 was that next year will be hard on the housing market. Well, I guess it's only hard if you didn't buy a home because values went up 16%. And then a year ago, she went on her famous rant saying, the housing boom's over. Well, prices since then have gone up 18% or $80,000. So if you've listened to Diana Olick, she's cost you $250,000 in losses since 2015. That's why we can't listen to the media. We have to look at the housing market and understand what is driving it. And let's do that right now. How would we answer the question? Just like everything else, prices are determined by supply and demand. So how do you measure demand in the housing market? It's called household formations. Okay, what's a household formation? A household formation example would be, imagine a couple that's living together under a roof. They decide to split up. So one person remains in that place that they were living in, that dwelling, and the other person moves out and gets their own place. So now the same two people, instead of being under one roof, now need two. So they have formed an additional household. Or maybe it's a person who's living with parents who moves out, the parents stay in the home, but the one who moves out gets their own place. Again, same family, but now they need an extra household. Those are household formations. And in the United States, right now, the amount of household formations is about 1.7 million per year. And if you look at it, it's kind of been pretty steady like this all the way since 2015. It's been around this range. You take out the COVID situation, which causes this noise, and it's been pretty much right around this area, about 1.7 million households. So that's your demand. Now, what about supply? Where does it come from? It doesn't come from somebody selling their home because they're going to buy a home typically. Where it comes from is new construction. So we don't want to look at just a housing start because that's a hole in the ground. You need home completions. And in the US today, the most recent numbers show 1.4 million homes completed, but of those, about 100,000 homes have to get destroyed every year because they get either renovated, rebuilt, or just retired because they're old. And now what you have is 1.3 million supply, 1.7 million demand. Now we're short about 400,000 homes a year right now. And that's why we're in a situation where inventory is still so tight. Now inventory has gotten better, but it's very tight. And people start talking about this and they're talking about it from the point of view that, oh, inventory is building, inventory is building. Well, the current existing home inventory is about 1.3 million units. And yes, while it's built, housing bubble conditions were almost 4 million units on the market. So you have a third of the inventory that you had before when the housing bubble was out there today. And it is still historically low. And by the way, the population's gone up since then too. Now, one thing that we're seeing a lot in the news is look at the build in inventory. Look how much inventory has come on the market. And people say, wow, in May, there was 870,000 homes on the market. Today there's 1.3 million. Oh my gosh, the end is near. It's all this inventory coming. And they'll talk about this and they'll show it to you. But what they fail to do is give you perspective. Here's the same chart, but just with more history. You see, it's true that inventory has built, but it does that every single year. Why does it do this? Why do they call it the spring home buying season? Why? It's because if you remember when you were a young person in going to school, especially in elementary school, when a new kid came into the class, if they came in the middle of the school year, it was always hard on that child. And other kids make fun. Their kids can be a little bit tough, right? Well, parents are sensitive to that, and they would prefer, if they can, to have their child start at the very beginning of the school year, which, depending on where you live, end of August, early September. So that means that they have to have completed the purchase of their home and been in that new home sometime over the summer, whether it's June, July, or August, they need to be in, which means if they had a home to sell, they have to sell it during April, May, June, July, right? So that's why every year, April, May, June, July, these homes come on the market for sale. But then the inventory crests and rolls over again, every single year. So this should not be a big surprise. In fact, when we look at it, that 1.3 million in existing home inventory, it doesn't tell you the whole story, because yes, there is 1.3 million homes in existing home inventory, but you know what this also counts? It counts those under contract. If you have a house under contract, it's off the market. If you have a customer says, hey, let's look at some homes, are you going to take a look and say, hey, you know what? I want to show you this house. It's closing next week. They've got their mortgage approved, but let's go look at it for giggles anyway. Of course not. It's off the market. So when you take a look at actual inventory, active listings, it's only 747,000. I mean, this is a country of 340 million people. We only got 747,000 homes in inventory. It's crazy. And this gives you an idea of what that looks like. Here's 2016, 17, 18. Again, you see what normal markets look like. Then you had COVID, and here's where we are right now, very low inventory. So while it is building, it is still way below. And a normal market, 25% of the homes in inventory are under contract. Today, it's very strong, 43%. Look, here's the bottom line. If the home's priced well, it's going to sell quickly. And a lot of what you're seeing in price reductions doesn't mean price depreciation. It's a very important concept. There's a term right now that's being used called housing recession. You have to look at housing two different ways. One is housing activity, which is important, and that helps to drive gross domestic product, sales. But then there's housing, the investment. That means, is the value of the home going to go up or going to go down? Now, housing activity, it's down about 20% year over year. Is that a housing recession? Okay. Activity recession, yes. But what about prices? Prices are still up 11% year over year. That's not a recession. Now, while we expect that to slow, it's not a recession. A couple of other quick points. Vacancies, they're not just low, that are an all-time low. When the housing market was in trouble, you had very high vacancies, which means people were carrying two mortgages, carrying two maintenances on homes, so they were more apt to take a low offer on the home that they were selling and dump it. You don't have that today. And another big one, people, they made this whole thing about forbearance and then foreclosures, and oh my gosh, the world's coming to an end. And we saw big headlines a couple of weeks ago where people say foreclosure activity has gone up dramatically. It's more than doubled from last year. It's up 150% from last year. Wow, that sounds bad, right? Well, last year there was a foreclosure moratorium and it was extremely low. In fact, the numbers that we got in the first 6 months were the same as we got the first 6 months of 2020, and they're down almost half. They're down by about 40% of what they were in a normal market in 2019, and certainly a lot less than historically. So this is what the media does. They try and scare people. As we take a look at another important aspect of what the media does is they drive this homes are not affordable. I want to show you a really important way that we need to look at affordability. Now, clearly, we will agree that it is less affordable this year than last year. Mortgage rates have gone up a lot. Prices have gone up a lot. There's no argument there. But we want you to see the whole picture because it's important to explain this to your customers. Last year, if you were buying a home and you needed to take out a mortgage for $400,000 last year, perhaps you can get a rate around 3.5%, and your payment would be about $1,800 a month. Now, to qualify for that, you'd probably have to have two income earners earning between $4,000 and $5,000 a month in the house. This year, home values have gone up 18%, So let's say you have to take out a mortgage this year, 18% higher. So instead of 400, you need to borrow 18% more than that, or 472. And this year rates are 5.75 instead of 3.5. So your payment is up by $950 a month. And that's what the media puts down every single day. It's not affordable. It's a big problem. Housing market's going to crash. Well, nobody says about your incomes going up. Now, if you look at what the median income rise is, the median income rise is 6.7% in the United States. That's the median income increase. But that includes everybody. And everybody means that terrific 16-year-old who's working hard at a fast food restaurant, they're eventually, God willing, going to be a home buyer, but it's just not today. So when you take out the bottom quadrant of income earners, people's incomes have been going up from last year roughly 9%. That means their income is going up by a great degree to offset this. Now, the problem comes in where you have other factors. You've got gasoline, food, services. So it is much more expensive this year for that family than it was last year. Somewhere around, about $400 or $500 a month more expensive this year. But people fail to look a little bit into the future, because what happens next year? See, if you buy your home, your payment's fixed and inflation will come down, but your income will go up. And next year, your payment will be a lot easier to make. It'll be a lot more affordable. This tells us that there is an enormous opportunity. All this negativity out there right now, your buyers should be using this as an opportunity, because rates are going to come down. They could refinance to a lower rate. Their income is going to go up, and they're going to do extremely well on this home. Now, one of the things that I'm on this show called American Dream, Financing the American Dream, and that's something that you can actually have your own segment on this show, whether you're in mortgage or real estate, or you could even do something together, something you may want to look into to gain market share and feature some of your listings. Now, what's our forecast? Well, our forecast is that rents are going to continue to rise. And they're currently going up 12 to 14% on new and 8% on renewals. And you are probably seeing this and experiencing this firsthand. But what about real estate? Our forecast is mid-single digit appreciation. Now, is that bad? I know we've been getting, 16%, 18%, 20%. So would 4% be a bad thing? Well, let's see why people create so much wealth with real estate. So let's take a look at this together. Imagine an example of a $400,000 purchase price. And let's just say you're going to put 10% down. So your down payment is $40,000. Now that's your investment. Your investment is $40,000. Let's say that home only goes up 4%. 4% on a $400,000 home, that's $16,000 profit. $16,000 profit on a $40,000 investment is a 40% rate of return. And that's why so many people have created wealth with real estate, because of this amazing leverage that you can have over time. It builds and builds and builds. And today, 1 out of every 6 transactions is an investment property. The thing of it is, there's no good way to analyze investment properties until now. We've created something, Guaranteed Rate Affinity. We'll have this within the next 2 weeks. And what you will finally be able to do is show your investors cash flow, rate of return, what they can expect to make, profitability, forecasted appreciation, everything an investor needs to know. And again, 1 out of every 6 transactions is an investment property, so you can better help them create wealth and see the amazing opportunities. Now, we know rates have gone up, and some people are hearing, you know what, maybe I'll just rent, right? Well, before they do that, let's use an extreme example. Let's just say that they don't really qualify and they need to use even something called a non-QM or a higher rate mortgage. I just want to use a very extreme circumstance of somebody who's thinking about renting because they can get the rent way below market on the rent, and the purchase would be very expensive. So let's walk through this together. Let's assume a $400,000 purchase with 10% down. That's a 360 mortgage. And folks, rates are nowhere near this, but let's just say it's either a non-QM loan or, just to show a crazy example, 7.5% mortgage rate, okay? They think they're going to be there for 9 years. And let's assume they don't refinance to a lower rate, which they will, but let's assume they don't. Now, let's tell you all the bad stuff. With real estate, your property taxes might go up on average 2% a year, not every year, but over time, that's maybe the average. The repair costs that you have to consider, you don't have that when you're renting. But on a $400,000 home, maybe $2,000 a year in repairs, so budget $166 a month. And then you've got the cost to sell. You don't have that with renting either. Now, for the last 63 years, the historical rate of appreciation has been about 4.5%. So let's say that continues over time. On the rental side, I think you'd agree, you can't get a $400,000 home for $2,750 a month in rent. Can't get it. But where it's normally going to be well over $3,000 a month, let's say you're getting this as a steal. And we know the average rents are going up in the US at 8%, but let's just say that you put a deal together with your landlord where you can't go up by a maximum will be your 6%. So should you buy or rent? Now, when somebody looks at it initially, they might say, oh my gosh, if I buy, it's $3,500 a month. If I rent, it's $2,700 a month. Forget it. I'm going to rent. It's much cheaper, right? Well, look at the purple line. That's your rental line. With that 6% increase, by year 5, you already break even, and then you're more expensive. Your cash flow difference over the 9 years is just about a break even. But you want to know what no one considers? And this is actually just amazing. I don't know why nobody considers this. You know, when you make your mortgage payment, it's principal and interest, right? And I think you all know where the interest goes, right? So where does the interest go? Interest goes to the lender. Okay, so what about the P, principal? Where does principal go? Principal goes to whom? Principal goes to you. It's your own money. Look, imagine for a minute I've got some cash in my left-hand pocket. I take it out of my left-hand pocket, I switch it, and I put it in my right-hand pocket. Is it still my money? Of course, but it's in a different location. When you write your mortgage payment check out, it's in your checking account when you're about to write the check. And then you give it to the lender and they deposit it, and the principal portion is now in equity. It reduces the balance of your mortgage. So is it still your money? Of course, it's just in a different location. And that principal in this particular case is substantial. $41,000. It always is a very large amount of money that nobody talks about. It's like the biggest secret that should be told is the amount of amortization and wealth creation from that. And then, of course, appreciation. Now, we might not get excited about 4.49%, but you know the magic of compounding? You know what that amounts to? $194,000. That's right. 4.49% appreciation means that $400,000 home 9 years from now will be worth $594,000. And you get a little tax benefit too. That's not bad. But subtract the cost to sell, and what happens? At this crazy example, where you're paying 7.5% compared to a rent that's way below market, you're still up by $205,000. And that doesn't account if you would have refinanced or whatever. And look, even after 6 years, it's 93,000. After 4 years, it's 38,000. After 3 years, it's 15,000. Now, in this crazy example, you might say to the customer, hey, look, if you think you're going to move within 2 years, probably should be looking at renting. But if you're going to be there longer than 2 years, clearly the better choice is to buy. And this is something that your GRA professional can do with you, because we have to show why compound interest is, as Albert Einstein said, the 8th wonder of the world. Now you could do this together with your GRA professional and co-brand this to your customer. So easy for them to do. It literally takes them less than 30 seconds to do for you. And another thing they can help you with is, now when you go out on your listing appointments, it's not easy. You know, you've got to bring that customer down to earth and kind of give them a good example. You've also got to pull a ton of comps. So why not be able to save some time for you? Because your GRA professional can give you an appraisal, an AVM, in less than 5 seconds before you go on that listing appointment. And it'll give you a value, it'll give you a range, it'll give you all the comparables around of what those homes are like and what their values are. So you can bring that customer at your listing down to earth. But also, how about saving the time and showing you all the closed sales? Time is money. It's accurate. Also gives you in the report median, price per square foot, sales price, and the amount of properties sold in this marketplace, so that you can then see what the activity is. And then one thing I think that is absolutely critical is the real estate report card. The real estate report card, this is something that It takes seconds for your GRI professional to pull up. But what this does is it shows you over the last 63 years what appreciation's been, over the last 10, over the last 5, what appreciation's been per year, the forecast for the next year and 5, and what this home would wind up appreciating to based upon that, and how much profit you will make, how it stacks up with other areas in the zip codes around the country, what the inventory levels look like, what the breakdown of age demographics in the marketplace is, what the renter situation is, how many households are going to be formed, the builder data of how many homes will be built. If there's a shortage, what's affordability look like? What's the income in this market? What's the unemployment? What's the job creations? Everything that the buyer needs to know, you could have in front of them and distinguish yourself and separate yourself from your competition and add more value. Look, if you start working this way with your customers, they'll gravitate to you. You'll close more opportunities and you'll get more referrals, period. We've got to think about things in an exponential growth manner, not linear. See, linear is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Exponential, that's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. Let me ask you this. If you could have $1 million or a penny a day that doubles for a month, what would you rather have? See, a penny at the end of a week, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, it's only 64 cents. At the end of 2 weeks, it's only $81. 3 weeks, well, $10,000, but not quite $1 million. But here, after 4 weeks, it's 1.3 million. Now, let me ask you something. What if you were able to start 2 days earlier? Well, then you'd have 5.3 million. What if you just started just 1 day before that? $10.7 million. Wow. Of all the doubles on this, which one do you want? Well, obviously you want the last double. How do you get more doubles? Start earlier. What's the lesson here? The lesson is that procrastination is a killer. Procrastination is something where we must, if we see an idea, we think that there's something that would benefit us, we must act, and we must act quickly. Procrastination is an enemy. Now, I know that the market's changed, and I understand that, but I still want you to know that your best opportunities are ahead of you. I think there's good news ahead. I think that rates will come down towards the end of this year as inflation comes down. That will spark opportunity. We have a little more inventory for more activity. We have opportunities for buyers today that will see the opportunity to refinance to a lower rate, that will see the opportunity to do a little bit of negotiation today that they couldn't have in the past, and to see huge numbers in profit, even from modest levels of appreciation. Your best opportunities are